Welcome to our podcast. Let's Make History Together is dedicated to Springfield, Ohio. We are a coalition of community members who are actively shaping a new, bold vision for our city. We are doing so through an initiative called Springfield 2051.
Welcome to Let's Make History Together, a series of podcasts exploring the ideas and strategies that will shape our community over the next generation. I am Kevin Rose, a community historian with the Turner Foundation and the executive director of the Hartman Rock Garden. Today we're focusing on one of the 7 pillars that have been identified in the Springfield 2051 process, and that's capitalizing on recreation and natural assets. So joining me today are 2 people that I think will bring an important perspective to this conversation. Kim Fish is the director of Philanthropy at the Crabill Family Foundation, and equally important for this conversation, she is a park commissioner, and I should also say an avid cyclist and an avid user of our park system. And also David Beurle, who is the founder of Future IQ and has served as our lead consultant point person on this project, Springfield 2051. So,
hello, Kevin.
Welcome.
Hi, Kevin.
So, David, I'll start off with you. In the Springfield 2051 planning process, obviously capitalizing on recreation and natural assets became one of the key pillars. I mean, that's why we're here, right? We're here to talk about it. Why do you think the community saw this as one of those 7 areas that was so strategic for our future?
Yeah, so Kevin, I think just to give a little bit of context on this, so we've obviously had a lot of input from the community through listening sessions and surveys and so on. And these 7 pillars represent what's emerged as the key focus areas that people have identified that they'd like to see work on in order to make the preferred future happen. And I actually find this one really fascinating because it picks up a couple of big strategic items, right? So the recreation piece, we heard right from the get-go in the listening sessions, people who are residents here have a really deep appreciation of the recreation opportunities, and particularly what really came out high on that was the trails. And you're really lucky you have a backbone of a kind of regional trail that runs right through, but then you have a lot of other sort of spur trails and so on. I think that's a really big, important issue that people really connect to in a big way. And then that's complemented also by people appreciating the natural environment and the degree of which there's like rivers and kind of parklands and so on. And that I think all contributes to a quality of life and an ambience that people are looking for. So that's one big element, right? The other big element that's in this pillar is around natural resources. And this started to really emerge as we got into more strategic conversations, started to sort of say, well, what's Springfield got that it can leverage that makes it unique, that is part of our future value proposition? And people have really nailed or hit on that the freshwater resources that are here, so large protected aquifers, which are really quite unusual, like that they're remaining intact, and the quality of the resources like of soil and so on. Though people saw those as really important assets, and there's a sensitivity to this because people know that they're important. They see that they've got potential for the future, but they really also want to make sure that they're protected rather than exploited or very carefully managed, right? And I think that's going to be an important nuance as we go forward. Wrapping all that together, I think what ties those together in this pillar is that people have seen this whole package of recreation and natural assets, also part of the quality of life that's here, but also part of the value proposition that could make the Springfield area appealing to other people. That's what people have really hit on, saying, look, we've got something here that is really unique. It might become increasingly important as we see the effects of climate change. People are likely to start to look, and we actually have met a number of people through the engagement sessions who've moved here because they can see the direction of other areas, environmentally and so on, that not to their liking, and they've identified places like Springfield, which are these sort of smaller cities in the upper Midwest sort of area that might have resilience in climate change. So I think this is a really exciting pillar. It's got all sorts of layers, right? It's got everything from the person who just wants to go out and walk their dog on a local trail to people who are thinking about this could be part of our big storyline for the future as we think about where do we fit into the world.
Yeah. And so Kim, you've been in Springfield, I think, your entire life, right? You maybe
in and out.
Gone for brief periods and then back again. So you've seen Springfield evolve over time and have seen natural resources evolve. When you think about these things today, how is this conversation that we're having different from what it was 20 or 30 years ago?
Well, when I think 20 or 30 years ago, I was raising my kids here. And so I think about the kinds of things we were doing then versus what we're doing now, or what they're doing now when they come back to visit. Certainly we have soccer and baseball. We've always been a big baseball. We've got lots of playing fields and those kinds of things. Tennis, now a lot of pickleball. But the things that we have probably added in the last 15 to 20 years are, like David said, they're taking advantage of those natural resources. So growing up here, kayaking was not a thing. But I mean, now I own a kayak, and we, as a park commissioner, we just opened a new park, that land that was donated to us, that provides free public access now to the Mad River. So kayaking is a big part of what we do now as a family when people come here. We've got the Whitewater Kayaking Park downtown, right by Snyder Park. Those things weren't here at all before. Biking used to be biking over to your neighbor's house, and now biking is biking to Cincinnati, or biking to Urbana for coffee, or biking on the country roads. And, I have met people who, like David had mentioned, who have moved here for the bike paths. I mean, I know one person and one couple who moved here because they want to be able to get right outside of their garage and get onto the bike path. And so those things were not here. The Mad River Gorge, which we have these beautiful limestone cliffs that we always used to just drive by as kids. And now we've got a fantastic climbing facility that is maintained and visited by people from many, many states. So actually just all these different ways to enjoy the natural resources, in addition to lots of playing fields for traditional sports, it's an extra layer that wasn't here 20 years ago.
Yeah, can I just
please
build on that too, Kim? Because I think your comments are fascinating, right? And they really play to what I see as emerging macro trends of how people want to live. I think we're looking at sort of an emerging era of people being much more active as human beings in retirement or in life. And so these notions of walkability and bikeability, they're becoming much more important for people's criteria when they think about a community. And I think it's really exciting because Springfield is so well placed with at least the big backbone building blocks for what could be a really interesting sort of recreational outdoor kind of sort of venture activity. And plus your climate means you can get out most of the year, right? And so it's got immense appeal for people.
Yeah. It's thinking of the rock climbing. One of my favorite things to do in Springfield is license plate watching. Right, you go to the Westcott House, and the plates are. I remember one day they were from like 10 different states, 10 different cars, 10 different states. Hartman Rock Garden, some of the same, and I wasn't expecting it at the rock climbing at Mad River Gorge. I went out there, and it was like 6 different. There were like 6 people there. It was not a huge day out there, and 6 different states on there, and it was amazing to just see.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like the Climbers Coalition, which helps us actually put the climbing routes into the rocks and then does a safety inspection every year. They're based out of Colorado, but they bring people in from across the country because this kind of rock is different than others, and people want to have those different experiences. And then the last thing I'll add to this, which is just it's a weird story, but we have dear friends that live in San Diego, and they were at a medical conference and they met somebody from Springfield. They noticed his name tag, Springfield, Ohio. And these people said, "Oh, Springfield, Ohio, we vacation there." And the guy thought they were kidding. And they said, "No." They said, "We live in San Diego, but our bike paths are terribly crowded. And we come every summer and we ride the bike paths and we take our kids to the fair at New Boston and we go pick raspberries." And so it's weird because there are days, today being one of them, where I'd change with San Diego for their weather. But, you can do anything you want here and not be crowded out. And there's just such a diversity of things you can do, and that's pretty rare.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question, because we often think of recreation as a quality of life issue. It's almost always phrased as a quality of life issue. And Kim, you talked about it a little bit before. It's really about economic development as well. I mean, the amount of people, the number of people that are coming in. And again, I work in the world of arts, right? And we see these people come in, but when we ask them what else they're here for, why they're here for recreation. They're here to see that, and then they do other things. They go to restaurants. So how do you think these recreational amenities are making an impact, say, in the local community that in maybe ways that we're not necessarily always seeing?
I mean, you mentioned it. People come into town. I mean, we were having lunch at Hi Hat the other day, and so we were being loud and laughing. It was a birthday, and some people came over from another table and said, "Do you want us to take your picture?" So we did. And it turns out they were people that have known each other since kindergarten. One lives in Columbus, one lives in Cincinnati, and they meet up here every 6 months, and they do something different here. And of course, we had Beth with us. So Beth was giving them the next 3 years of activities that they could do. But, we're convenient to get to. We're affordable. We're easy to get around. You can find a parking space. And so people do come here just to have something different to do. And when they do that and they have a good experience, they put it on social media, they go home and tell their friends, but they're here for something, whether they come for Jazz Fest because we have a nice downtown to have an open festival, or they come for, any of those, the kayaking kinds of things. They talk about it, but they come here and they spend money in our restaurants, and they buy souvenirs, and they're very low impact, but they leave some money behind.
Yeah.
And that helps it helps us keep a local character that a lot of communities don't have anymore. Our local restaurants, local shops, and those things are appreciated, local coffee shops. And I think that people like that. I think people like that authenticity.
It's one of the things I think that's often overlooked is there is different levels of economic impact with visitors. And I know with both recreation and arts and culture, a lot of these people are supporting those things that we already love about Springfield. You were just mentioning the little coffee shops,
Right.
The local restaurants, the more boutique hotels. So they're supporting those things that you already want. And we want Bechtel Avenue here in Springfield. Yep. We want all types of things. We want chain restaurants. We need all of those to succeed. But these visitors are really making a huge impact at these things that are so special to all of us. So on that topic, one of the questions that has come up quite a bit as we've focused on recreation is how accessible recreation, how our parks, our trails are to all residents in all parts of Springfield. Because historically, not all parts of Springfield and all parts of most communities were equally accessible to parks. And I know we've had conversations with Dr. Carlos Marshall, who's focused a lot on this. And I know it's something our Parks District has been aware of and working. Can you talk a little bit about access here in our community?
Yeah. It has been very interesting. We have, I think, 37 parks or something, and they range from the tiny little Gallagher Fen, which if you don't know where it is, you won't find it, but it's a great place to go birding, to like Davie Moore Park. And one thing that we've been able to do as a community, and I wouldn't say it's just the Park District, but not only have we reinvested in parks that were needing reinvestment. Like Davie Moore now has new playgrounds, new basketball courts, and decorations and things that are thematic and adding things to that. But we're also adding new parks, so the Euclid Avenue Park, which just opened, has a basketball court and a pickleball court, and it's raising money now for play structures. Was designed, and Carlos and his group gave input into what things should be in that park. Certainly there's an issue of equity here. I mean, there are certainly areas of town that have been, they were disinvested in intentionally, and then they were also, many of these areas are former sites of old manufacturing plants. So you just have this big slab of concrete and who knows what else. And so slowly, by purposefully, which we are doing purposefully as a community, making sure that people have a neighborhood park that they can walk to with their kids, and they don't have to cross a big street to get to one. They don't have to get into a car to get to one. I think that's a very important thing that we all benefit from. We have a lot of community gardens in town, and they're in different parts of town so that neighbors can actually grow and garden and do those things together. So pulling people in all parts of town out to experience things close to home. It shouldn't have to be a big day thing that we're going to the park. It should be part of your life. Let's go get some fresh air. Let's go burn off some of that 2-year-old, 3-year-old energy on a play structure that is not my kitchen counter is there. And I think that I know from the foundation side and from the park side, we have added a lot. The parks take over some of these places and maintain them. And we couldn't do a lot of that without volunteers. And I know we were going to maybe talk about sort of the fiscal aspect of this. And one thing I just want to mention now, if I can, is
Yeah.
not only do we have a lot of parks and we have a lot of trails connecting them, but we have a lot of people who just volunteer their time. Our park district operates on a per acre basis at 1/3 of what the national average is.
Wow.
And part of that is we've got a lot of people in a park district who just love their job, who are retired from something and they're doing this. They're out there mowing or blowing off the bike trails because they love it. But we also have a lot of volunteers. Master gardeners, for instance. Snyder Park, the old golf course, is now an awesome children's garden with Kiwanis and those guys. And people are maintaining these. There are lots of little organizations that are doing those, and they're just individuals who do it. People who are checking the bluebird boxes and making sure that they're cleaned out after each clutch so that we get more bluebirds. And it's a community where if you want to help and you want to make it a better community or preserve the things about it you love, there's no shortage of way to do it. And I'm always amazed at the people who just have this little quiet thing on the side that they go do, where they might adopt a section of the bike path and they pick up trash.
Yeah.
And that builds community in the same way that the connectedness of the trails is that you're on the trail and you're seeing somebody helping, or you're going for a walk and you're seeing somebody clean out a bluebird next. You're like, we're in this together. And that's community. That reinforces the fact that it's 34 degrees today. It tells you that there's good reasons to live here.
I was going to mention earlier when you were talking about economic development, I think one of the main areas of economic development are where people come here thinking it's going to be warm and it's 34 degrees and they need to go buy a coat.
Yes.
It's part of our economy. But I'm really glad you said that, because then the question is, how is that sustainable, right? We can rely on volunteers, and volunteers are amazing. I doubt you're going to find an area of this country that per capita has more volunteerism than we do. And it's wonderful, but it's then figuring out, well, how do we make sure these things are sustainable? Because is that going to last long term? Is that the answer? And how can we fund these things better, right? How can we ensure that these parks, which are one of our key things, and it came up again and again and again as being so important, how can we be sure that they're not just going to be the same, but they're going to be better in 25 years, right? And that, I think, is the key.
I'm going to take a first short swing at this and then
Please.
hand it over to David. So I think that I had some marketing experience in my life. So I think that the short way to do this is to say to everybody who's listening this, get involved with Springfield 2051 and say that you're going to volunteer and join this pillar and find out what we kind of communally feel like we need to do next and be part of it. But on a personal level, and I was thinking about that, I mean, I grew up going to Glen Helen and Yellow Springs, and that's probably where I got my start with this naturalist stuff. And, educating people of whatever ages they are. We have people that are preserving our natural resources. We have farmers who are investing in putting native crops or native grassland in parts of their field that are preserving the drainage and slowing down runoff and preserving our streams. We have people who are putting their lands in conservation easements. We have people who, like the Duncan and Riley families, who were in a position to donate land that had the river. So, and we have people, like I said, that are cleaning out bluebird boxes. People can donate if you let them know. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to just point things out to people that we see or that other people are doing. Point it out to your kids. Point it out to your parents when they ask where you're going, and say, well, I'm going to go for a walk and I'm taking a bag because people leave their trash and I'm picking up their trash. Just live by example. And if you feel that you have extra capacity in your life, join us at 2051 and we'll find a way for you to make an impact.
Well, thank you. That's a great little plug.
All right, David, your turn.
So David, we've talked a lot about recreation, right?
Yeah.
It's in recreation and natural assets go hand in hand, right? We need these natural assets to have the recreational opportunities that we have. But there's also been a lot of discussion just on the natural assets that we have for a variety of reasons, right? For health and wellness in this region. Why has stewardship become such a critical part of our long-term planning and the discussions that we've been having as a community around those natural resources?
I think what's been emerging in the conversations is that deeper connection to the resources. And, I think we all see challenges in the environment. We all see all the changing climatic patterns. We see the consequences of those things, and I think people are starting at a local level, starting to recognise. Look, we're going to look after what we're in, and that's very much what you were talking to, Kim. So I do think that in a community of your scale, there is a chance for people to be much more connected to the natural environment and the sort of outdoors and the agricultural landscapes. People can live in a larger urban centre and have very little connection to what you would call an uncurated sort of natural experience. But here you've got it in spadefuls, right? I would though add that I do think at the level of the parks and amenities and trails, I think it's also really important community fabric building sort of assets, because there's a lot of connectivity that occurs on those trails, and as people use those to get to certain parks and so on. And I know there's talk and planning about how to connect all these things together, but I think at the level of a community, to me, it's a no-brainer investing in these public spaces because they're shared spaces. And in a community that does have and has had sort of inequalities economically, you have people who are better off than others and so on. This is one of the, public spaces are the places that people can come to and share and enjoy. And, even at the level of some of the events that activate those spaces. So we've heard a lot of people talk about the Jazz and Blues Festival last year and how that was so exciting because it brought people in from all across the community. And they talked about people walking into that event, right? So coming in. So I think there's a really important social evolution overlay that goes with these amenities and resources that are essentially public spaces. And I think the funding issue is really important because, as you said, Kim, if it's at the level of a third of what the average is in this country, imagine if you were able to elevate some of those resources. What would the parks and amenities look like if you were at 50% or 60% of sort of comparable funding levels, right? There's certainly a lot of appetite there, and I know these things are challenging because, things cost money, but there is a large group of people who are very passionate about it for sure in this community.
Yeah, it's one of the questions we had planned to ask. We talked about what questions to ask, right? Was what things might be underappreciated. And I think we've talked quite a bit about that. But one thing I would actually like to add in on that myself, on those things, is the bicycle trail systems. And I know we often, we've talked about them, but that they're for use for other than cyclists, right? I'm a runner, and I can leave my house and within 5 blocks get on a trail and run. I mean, I could technically run for days without getting off the trail, but I'm not in shape like that. But I can run on a loop for about 4.5 miles with almost never getting off a trail. And you're running, you're following along streams, there's deer walking through. And the idea that I can live in an urban environment, my neighbor's house is like 7 feet from my house, right? A close-knit Victorian neighborhood right off of this downtown of one of the, 10 largest cities in Ohio, and that you can have access to these things so quickly is really amazing. And then on that note, as a father of 2 small children, I don't want them on the roads right now, right? There's a lot of distracted driving. That's not just Springfield, it's across the country. And the idea that I can take them down on their bike and they can really kind of learn to ride their bike in these really safe environments is just outstanding. So for us, when we talk about those things, what keeps us here? Because we're not from here, right? We can live, and anyone, right? Even if you're from here, you can live anywhere, you can move anywhere. And Marta and I, my wife and I, talk about what keeps us here. Like, what are those things that if we had a great job opportunity, why would we turn it down? And the trails are one of the key things. And I'm shocked actually that there's not sometimes more people using them. Yeah. And it's how can we get the word out? So I feel like they're underappreciated just because we don't see as much activity within the core of the community. Go outside of Springfield and there's tons of people that park and use them and come into our community. So I'm excited for what that next generation means for recreation and what it's going to do for this community. To kind of sum up, I'll finish up with one final question. And Kim, I'll start with you with this. You work in philanthropy. You have the great privilege, and I say this as someone who has also worked in philanthropy, to see the need in the community and to be able to address that need. When you look at recreation and natural resources, what do you think is that one investment that maybe we should be making? I'm not saying you guys are going to make it, that we could be doing to ensure that we see improvements in this next generation, the next 25 years in terms of recreation? Tough question.
It is a tough question because I think that the one investment is in education about the value of these assets. And I think that's a hard thing to do when you live in, I would say, in many areas, we in Springfield don't feel like we live in an enriched environment. Like we don't have a ton of this or a ton of that. Shopping, I was visiting my kids in Chicago, and it's like so much easier when you have to like do stuff there. But we have this wealth of trails and parks and open spaces, and we take them for granted. And so when we're here, I've got kids that live in Chicago and New York. They don't have that. And so how do you help the people who are here really realize that this is that thing that you want to invest in preserving on a daily basis, on a yearly basis? Because I think this is something that we have to do together. Because like you said, David, this is public shared property. A foundation, like I like the idea of the Sportsplex downtown because that will bring more people into town and it will bring more of those organized sports and it will generate some revenue. But there's not a single, I like the idea of the Euclid Park and we're helping to fund that. But it's all of these places, because if we only had one of those parks, we wouldn't be the same place. So I think we need to make sure that we take each other by the hand and we show each other someplace, like, come with me to the Gallagher Fen once. Isn't this a cool place? Or let's go kayak, So that investment in appreciating what you take for granted, I don't know how we do that. We all take things for granted. And then we realize when they're gone that we screwed up, that we should have paid more attention. So I think we need to not screw up here. We need to realize how valuable this is, and as a community, everybody do their part to make sure that it's here for the next generation. I don't want to lose our aquifer. That's a hard thing to get back. I love the fact that we have great drinking water, that we have all these streams. I don't want to see one of them polluted and dead fish floating on it. So how do I live that day to day? And I think what we do is we live it day to day by being out and appreciating it and sharing it with the others. So unfortunately, that is not something that even the Crabill Foundation can solely fund and make happen.
Yeah.
So it takes all of us.
I love that answer. And I think there's this truth there, right? That public open spaces is an invention. Like, this hasn't always existed. Maybe it has going back in early human history, right, where you could just go out. But this is something that came out of kind of the progressive era in America, the idea that we would have these shared resources as a community. And in Springfield, it was Snyder Park, right? And Snyder Park's this wedge. And when the Snyder family donated it, this was a new concept. 1897, 1895, somewhere in there. I should know this as the historian at the table, but a key invention in this community, right, where they're following this that's happening elsewhere, and what we have has been created. It's been created by humans, by the people who came before us, and in many ways, the people who are here with us today, right? You were talking about creating new public park spaces. That we have created this. It's not just something that's going to be here, and if we don't invest in it, it's something that ultimately goes away. On our tours, we talk about the fact that Springfield used to have a waterfall. We had a beautiful waterfall that would roll through the middle of this community back 225 years ago, and it would pour over the edge of Cliff Park, cascading down into what was then called the Lagonda River. And we don't have that today, right? Because there was other investments, other priorities as a community. And Springfield wouldn't be the same if maybe that had changed. But we need to understand, just because there is something amazing in this community doesn't mean that it will be here long term. Right. I would love to have that waterfall back. I mean, no one alive ever witnessed it. But the things that we love about this community that we've seen, and a lot of the improvements and changes that we've seen in Springfield, a lot of them have happened over the last 25 years. But recreation and parks, a lot of these investments are 100, 125 years old, and they're still, I'll say, going strong on being these things. So then that question is, what can we be doing today to create those for our children and grandchildren. So I applaud your efforts, Kim, you and at the foundation and everyone on the Park Commission and the work that you're doing. And I really look forward to the future of these discussions. So I guess to finish up, I'll encourage everyone who's watching and listening to get involved in this process. Kim said it earlier, this is a great opportunity to shape this discussion. If this is something that matters to you, come, because these are not discussions that are happening behind closed doors. Well, they are behind closed doors, but everyone's welcome to come in before we close those doors, because we want the community to be involved in this process, because that's where the good ideas are going to come from. So stay tuned to Springfield2051.com. Look in your local newspaper, the Springfield News Sun. Like us on Facebook, follow what we're doing, and come to those meetings, because we need your input. We need that dialogue for the future of this project. So until then, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
You have been listening to Let's Make History Together podcast. You can visit letsmakehistorytogether.com for more episodes. You may also check out Springfield2051.com to learn how you can get involved in the process of shaping our community's future. Special thanks to our guests and to you, our listeners and fellow community members. The music excerpt used for this podcast is by Johnny Lytle, one of Springfield's legendary music stars.